Welcome to Worth Quoting, part of a speaker series sponsored by Florida Community College of Jacksonville and the Women's Center here. I'm Carol Miner, the provost of the Open Campus, and I'm really glad to introduce you to Beverly Sills, who has an incredible story to tell. We're so glad to have you with us in Jacksonville, Beverly.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
I think most people see you as an opera star. And
That's good.
hear you as an opera star.
After all these years, I would be a little insulted if they didn't.
Well, I think you've had such wonderful, you've had really two careers, but I think certainly the opera one is the foremost, and being a prima donna as yourself. Most people think that you just get into show business or the opera and you've already made it. I know that you had a very tough row to hoe. Can you give us a little history about how you made it to superstardom in the opera companies?
Well, it was a very long road. It was not really endorsed by my father. My father thought that fast, loose women went on the stage. And it was a European household. And I think he just felt that my brothers would accomplish a great deal, and indeed they have, but that I should plan to get married in my teens. Financially, it would relieve a great burden from the family. And in those times, and I'm 60 now, so we have to go back 45 years. In those times, women really only had one option, and that option was to get married and have children. It's a very worthwhile option. I don't put that option down. I think my mother is probably one of the most extraordinary and accomplished women I've ever known. And she has, I won't say only, I'll say she has raised her 3 children and run a house for them and set certain standards for her children, which she not only imposed on them, but imposed on herself. She used herself as a model for us. So I have the highest regard for women who make that choice. Today they do have that choice. In my mother's time, there was no choice. That's what they did. And she did it well, very well. And my father was going to continue that tradition. And again, it was through my mother that she gave me the dream. My mother was not a show business mother. She was a European woman who came to this country from Russia. She didn't know anything about show business. She only knew that I was entitled to have a dream as my brothers were. And that it turned out when I was a little girl that I dreamed of being an opera star. Was not I mean, it didn't seem unusual to her. I don't think anything I would have said I wanted to be would have been unusual to her. She just felt that I was entitled to have a dream, and if she could help make it come true, fine. And even if it was only as a support system for me, she'd be there.
Was it her love of music and her playing of the records that inspired you?
Yeah, she had this funny little collection of recordings of a very famous opera star of that era. And she'd come into the kitchen, and we had what used to be called a Victrola. You know, today when you think of the CDs and the high tech, I mean, this was actually a wind-up toy, you know, and she'd put these big, heavy 78s on it. And before she even made coffee for my father for breakfast, there was this record going at full blast. It's amazing that my 2 brothers and I and my father really didn't grow up just nuts from the sound of all this music at 6 o'clock in the morning. But I just got hooked on them. I just couldn't stop playing them myself, and I began to do at a very early age what I thought was a wonderful imitation of this great opera star. But that's what I wanted to be, and while my mother didn't know what to do about it, she just encouraged me as much as she could.
Did she intervene with her husband in your sake?
Yeah, she's a very interesting woman even today. She's now 80, going to be 87, and she's quite feisty. In the early days, she was very giggly, and she had a way of making you do exactly what she wanted you to, but making you feel that it was your idea to do it all along, which is exactly what she did with my father. I mean, he was really the authoritative figure in the family. Unlike today, where we sort of ridicule. If you watch your sitcoms on television, it's the father who's the ridiculous object, which is a great loss to us women, not only as wives and mothers, but as children. We put the men down. That was not happening in my time. My father was the authoritative figure, but my mother knew how to get around him and to make him feel the enthusiasm for projects that we may have had that he really didn't think very highly of. She was very clever with him. They had, of course, a very good marriage, short-lived because he died at a very early age. But she is to this day a dreamer. She's very artistic and very fey, and she loves to do things with her hands and doesn't recognize any limitations, and she has, unfortunately, plenty now that she's reached this age, but doesn't recognize them. So her spirit is friends tell me that they call her, that it's not only a treat to talk to her, but it's a treatment. They said they save a fortune in psychiatric money, you know, that's just, they pour out everything to her, and she's a very receptive, upbeat woman.
Do you have, she sounds like a role model to you.
Yes, she is.
Do you have any other role models as you were growing up?
I used to worship Eleanor Roosevelt, and I'll tell you why. I knew that she was not a very pretty woman, and as I was growing up, I really thought that I was quite ugly and unattractive. I was much bigger than everybody else. So I didn't have, when I was a child and just going into my teens, I didn't have many boyfriends where the cute little ones seemed to have. I was always a little overweight and big. And I just felt that I wasn't very pretty. So I used her as a role model because she was so bright and so compassionate and so caring about other people that when I finally did get to meet her, I was 10 years old, I thought she was one of the most beautiful women I'd met. I couldn't believe that I ever thought she was unattractive. I used her for a long time as a role model, and you know, when I began to go about the country talking to people, I used her again in the back of my mind. She was a woman with a strange speaking voice, and I figured that there's a message there somewhere that people were listening to everything she said and not walking away from that talking about her clothes or what she looked like or the hat she had on her head. That they always walked away talking about the essence of what she was and not any of her physical attributes. So I used her quite a lot in my professional career.
Were there any other stars that you wanted to do as well as or better than? Or?
Well, I wanted, Lily Pons was a very famous opera star, very famous. Of course, she was 5 feet tall and weighed 90 pounds, so you have to understand why I just worshipped her. The first time that I ever heard her sing, I was about 8, and I was already 2 inches taller and outweighed her by about 20 pounds. But I still dreamed of looking like her. I thought there was a miracle somewhere that I would grow up and be dainty and petite. It never quite worked out, and years later, many years, I met her finally. We became very good friends. And I did an opera that she had done called The Daughter of the Regiment. And she came to see me in her little white coat, and she's still this big and still tiny. And she said to me in this funny French accent that she never lost, "Oh, Beverly," she said, "when I did this role, I came out on a white horse." And I could see her, you know, this dainty little thing on a white horse. And I said, "Lily, there'll never be a horse big enough to bring me on the stage." But she was another role model. I had a lot of role models, a lot of women that I admired a lot, that I followed their writings or their performances.
But you did so many things first. I mean, you did so many things first. How can you find role models to do that? You know, some people can't see beyond. They don't see themselves in a certain role because there's nobody else out front. You had a lot of people. You blazed a lot of trails yourself.
Yeah, I think, again, you know, that has to come from within. I think you have to start talking to yourself a little bit and appreciating yourself. I think we have an obligation to other human beings to be kind and compassionate, sympathetic. And then I think we have an obligation to ourselves. I'm not into the me generation. I once said to my second daughter, try to get out of bed and spend 24 hours without using the words I, me, or my, and see how long you can last. Because I felt that some of the things she had done were so self-centered and so uncaring about anybody else. But past that, I think you have to have a healthy idea of what your capabilities and limitations are and concentrate on your capabilities. We all have enormous limitations. I mean, even the most successful people that we use as role models are limited in areas. And I don't think you should ever allow yourself to be put down. When I went on stage, I used to say to myself, perhaps it was my funny way to give myself courage, whatever. I'd say, don't be nervous, kiddo. If there's anybody out there who could do it better than you, they'd be up there doing it. That sort of calmed me down. And even when I read criticism about myself, I told myself, well, if they could do it better, let them try it. I knew that what I had done was as best as I could do. If it's not good enough for some people, too bad. Don't come to hear me the next time. That's your privilege.
That's right.
But,
oh, excuse me, go ahead.
Go ahead.
So much of that is attitude. How much of your success is really hard work and determination?
It's all hard work and determination.
Or luck, or whatever you call it.
Luck always plays a part in everything we do. You have to be in the right psychological place at the right psychological time. But if you're going to take full credit for your success, then you have to take full credit for your blame. I used to say, I never share credit, blame, or desserts. If you've done something well, take the credit for it. And if you've done something poorly, don't pass the buck on to somebody else. Acknowledge the fact that you've made a mess of it and fix it. I listen, because I do go around speaking to a lot of universities, talk to young people. I listen to a lot of people say, you know, I'm this way because my mother did this to me, or circumstances did this. Fine, I'll go along with that. Your mother did this to you, circumstances. Here's a moment, and you can say to yourself, but from the rest of my life on, I'm going to change all that, because you can alter the course of your life. I believe, you know, that it's written down in a big book and it's all going to happen. Yes, that's true. I do believe that. But the path to that end is really in your control. And I think the most boring thing, and you know, I've raised 5 kids, and I've been aggravated with my kids, and I've been ecstatic with them, and I've been proud, but the worst thing that can happen is if you get bored with them. And I get bored when they whine about how other people have done this to them. No, they've done it to themselves. You can have a sensational life. You really can, if you just decide that this is what you want, this is what you're willing to sacrifice for it, and remain a decent human being in the quest for that goal. I think more than that, you don't have to make commitment to. But I enjoyed my career. I had a great many difficulties along the way. Once I got so low that I made a list of all the terrible things that had happened to me. And they were really quite horrendous. And as I wrote them down, I began to giggle because I kept thinking, how has this woman survived it? But then I made the positive list, and it far outnumbered the baddies on it. And I think had the good things not outnumbered the bad, it would be up to me to change that.
That's true. You had some challenges in your life. You have 5 children, 2 of whom were handicapped, and that has gotten you into this March of Dimes crusade that you're into now, a lot of people would have put their careers aside or felt defeated by this. How were you able to grow from that experience?
Well, I stopped asking, why did this happen to me? And looked at those two kids and said, why did this happen to them? And decided that if I kept asking that question, I might be able to help prevent it from happening to other children. And so that's how I got involved. A lot of people think that the March of Dimes is synonymous with polio. As a matter of fact, they were the only charitable organization that set out to conquer an illness and did it.
And did it. Mm-hmm.
Polio is now not a part of our lives. And so they moved over to the area of birth defects. And so I began to work with them. Out of all negatives, you see, positives do come.
Or could come.
Could come and should come if you just get off your behind and see that they do happen. I think if you just wallow in your misery, it's just sheer laziness.
What do you think, what recommendations would you have to young people that you've learned that you'd like to pass on to them? What do you tell your daughters about how to...
What do I tell my daughters?
What do you tell your sons? Do you tell them the same things?
Well, I only have one son, and that's the severely handicapped boy who can't hear and can't talk, and he's epileptic and retarded and autistic and deaf. I mean, there's so many problems there. So he and I just touch a lot. We don't talk. We communicate in a strange way that only a mother and a child like this can communicate. As far as my daughters, one of them once said to me, you know, it's not easy being the daughter of Beverly Sills. And I said, oh, I think it's very easy. I'm a very nice woman. I said, I'm a good mother. Your problem is that foremost in your mind is the name Beverly Sills. And what should be foremost in your mind is the word mother. I don't deal with you like an opera singer, so don't deal with me as if I am one. As far as what I tell them, have a dream and never for 1 minute think it's an impossible one. That's what, if I've passed on anything to them, it's what my mother passed on to me. And I think it's an impossible goal to say, however, that I'm a happy person. I think none of us can be completely happy, but I think we can be cheerful. And in a way that's really better, because happiness is sort of self, cheerfulness gets spread around.
I really admired your ability to leave your career at a height and then move on to something new and different. How did you make that decision?
Well, I wanted to get out while people were saying it's too soon, rather than when is that woman ever going to quit. I think timing is important. Again, I think you have to know your potential and know your limitations. And nobody knows you as well as you know yourself. I began to feel that I would, if I stayed on longer, would not be able to perform at the standards I had set for myself, and I simply was not willing to make any compromises. And I had to cancel 5 years engagements, and I didn't want to wait till there were no more engagements in my future. I wanted to go out feeling wanted, and it was a long career. It was time to let somebody younger have a stab at the dream. I didn't have any regrets at all. It's never troubled me a bit.
So then you took on a new challenge.
Took on the running of the company that had made my career. When I started, there was a great anti-American opera singer attitude. If the name was unpronounceable, you were a better opera singer. And I took up the cause of the American artist. The Metropolitan Opera ignored me until they really couldn't anymore. And I had sung at every major opera house in the world. You just name it, I'd been there, and very successfully. But my own country's great opera company would not take me in. that was a great blow to me, I must say. And I made up my mind that when that day came, and it had to come, that I would sing there. They never knew what a prima donna was until I came in. For 24 hours, they knew what a prima donna was. And after that, after I got them to do exactly what I wanted them to do, that meant picking the opera, the cast, the conductor, the designer, the date of the debut, just laying out, tick, 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 everything I wanted. Then I had a wonderful time and with no more prima donna stuff. But I was invited to take over the helm of the New York City Opera, which is the only American repertory opera company in this country, therefore in the whole world. We give employment to more American artists than any other opera company in the whole world. And it was in keeping with what my passions were. And so I took over the company. It was bankrupt. Again, it's much more glamorous to pay for the salaries of Mr. Pavarotti or Mr. Domingo than for Miss Smith or Miss Jones. There was a time when our country had a terrible inferiority complex about homegrown products. If it didn't have a Paris label, how could it be a good, interesting dress? We were told the shoes from Italy were much better than we had in this country, so we put the shoe industry out of business. We are now going through the same process with our cars, of course. Everybody else makes better cars because we're so dumb we don't know how to make any cars. All of a sudden, having been the pioneers in the automobile profession, we now open up newspapers. We believe everything we read. And I think I just decided with the New York City Opera that I could give my chauvinism some air. And I took on the cause of the company, and I resigned from that 10 years later, which was just last year. I left it financially in very good shape. I proved that the artistic product was probably the highest in the country, and I have to tell you, even more rewarding than the night I sang at the Met myself. A night took place 6 weeks ago. I went to the Metropolitan Opera for a new production of Don Giovanni that they were doing. And 5 out of the 6 principals on that stage were New York City Opera people, and they were all Americans, and they took the place by storm. So while I don't say that Americans do things better than anybody else, I say we do them as well as anybody else. And lately we have come to recognize that in the arts. And we've come to recognize that now, even our clothes designers. We're very proud of the people that are making the dresses we're buying in the stores. And I really think it's time for a little pride in ourselves. We know how to get things done. We know how to do things. There is such a thing as American know-how. And it's time for a renaissance of that pride. I've traveled around a great deal in Europe. And I haven't seen anything in Europe, or I came back from Asia, I haven't seen anything there that I preferred to anything we've got. I'm interested to see the culture, and I'm interested in sharing. I made some talks in China. I was very interested to exchange cultural ideas, and horrified to see that we had a bloodbath on a campus, Kent, and they had a bloodbath in Tiananmen Square. So what we're looking at is a flaw in the human being, which yet doesn't know how to treat its fellow human being kindly. But in terms of labels like Chinese or American, I think we have to have some pride in what we do here, recognize other cultures, why not? But this is our country, this is where we live. If there's something about it we don't like, we should fix it. How do you view that from your hat of the March of Dimes spokesperson, or looking at youth in general? I think what you're saying about the pride is wonderful to hear, and I think everybody needs to hear that. I think a lot of people are concerned that our young people are having more and more problems as they grow up,
and we're very concerned with that at the college here. Have you, as you've traveled in Europe and other places, are they having the same sorts of growing pains we are with the teen pregnancies and the drug problems and all those other kinds of things?
Yes, they are. I was in Amsterdam not too long ago. First of all, Amsterdam is covered with graffiti. I've never seen anything like it. It's just not an untouched building. That's such an indication of a collapse of any kind of discipline. This is not a question of slapping somebody's wrist and saying, bad, bad, you shouldn't do that to a building. It's a question of looking into that human being and wanting to know, why did he want to destroy the building? What's the anger over? Yes, we're having a terrible problem, a drug problem. We're having trouble with teenage pregnancies. Again, it's partially, I'll say, I think it's two things. One thing, again, is the disappearance of the father from the home. There's something very comforting about having a father figure. The women's lib movement has helped to destroy a very, very valuable asset, and that is the men in our lives. The second thing I think that is very dangerous is I've been a woman out in the marketplace, and I've raised my children. I haven't had it all. My children have paid a price for it. And I think any woman who voluntarily decides to go out into the marketplace and there are young children at home should think about it a lot. For the woman who has to go out in the marketplace, because we know now that there are households that have to have 2 working people in it, then we have to begin to talk up. We're the only country in the world that makes no plans for childcare. The rest of the world is light years ahead of us, and we have no plans, nothing in the budgets of our state governments, our federal government, our city governments, to care for our children. Help us care for our children, for those of us who have to go out into the marketplace and work.
Are you sharing that view with your friends, the Bushes?
I'm sharing my view with a lot of my friends, period. There was a wonderful film called Network, I think it was called. And the man said, Peter Finch, I think was the actor, "Open up your windows," he said, "and start yelling. I'm sick and tired of this, and I'm not going to stand for it anymore." And we've become a nation of sheep. We just accept everything that's thrown at us. We don't have enough care for the elderly. Too bad. We don't have proper facilities for our sick people. Too bad. And yet we are the richest country in the world. Where is the money going? Well, you know, if we all get blown up this minute, we'll go down as the generation that perfected the most sophisticated means of self-destruction. What a legacy. Really something to be proud of. Now, how much further do we need to go with this? How much deader than dead can people be? Yeah. We already know we can destroy everybody. Okay, it's a wonderful accomplishment. Now the thing to do is to stockpile all those things. And we now can look at our friends, the Russians, say, we're not worried about you anymore, your whole system is falling apart. And anyhow, even if you get it all together again, we can blow you up, so the threat is over. Wonderful. Let's go back to, there was a moment when we were talking about peace dividends.
Yes.
Where are those peace dividends?
I think we're going to have to start yelling out the windows like you mentioned before.
I think so.
Unfortunately, we're out of time, and I'd like to leave it on the note of such positive contributions that you're still making in your career, your first, second, perhaps what your third career might be, and for all the inspiration that you've given everybody who's watching this program and all the other speeches on the campuses that you've done. So I'd like to thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you.
And thank you.